Greetings and welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. My name is Matt Locke and our guest today is Christiana Ochoa. Christiana is a professor at Indiana University's Maurer School of Law, where she teaches on issues that lie at the intersections of economic activity and human well-being, including in the areas of business and human rights and law and development. She holds a Juris Doctorate from Harvard Law School, and her scholarship has been widely published. Recently, Christiana completed her first documentary, Otra Cosa No Hay, There Is Nothing Else, which looks at the fragile equilibrium between the local community, foreign mining companies, and environmental conservation in the highlands of Colombia. Christy, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So would you like to take the first couple minutes to talk about filming There Is Nothing Else?
So filming was an incredible experience, really. As you know, law professors typically, although there are people who do field work, they typically write legal academic articles. And I was very interested in creating a different kind of product as a result of my research. I wanted it to reach different audiences and greater audiences. And so I had to find a way to do that. And filming a documentary seemed like a natural way, and I looked for help from a Colombian production company in order to help me in that process, and they were tremendous. It's a fabulous production company called En La Lucha Films, and through my partnership with them, we created what I think is a beautiful and really impactful documentary.
So what inspired you to go to Colombia and create this film?
So again, the perception that I have as a result of working for over a decade in legal academic circles is that legal academic articles and the circles that we reach with our scholarship traditionally are very important. We have great connections in the policy world and have the potential to make real impacts on the shape and form and reach of laws, both in the United States and abroad. That said, the area in which I work, which is really dealing with what I consider to be underprotected populations, and in large part, or often, invisible populations, there's a gap between what you can describe in your writing capacity, or rather, I should say, what I was able to describe in my writing capacity, and what I think are the more visceral senses that come out of actually being in a location that is being significantly affected by the arrival of foreign investors, and the way that feels on the ground is often quite different than the way that it comes through on paper. And so I was hoping to be able to close that gap by doing both field work and also by filming that work, so that people could have a sense of being in the place and feel a little bit more, rather than simply understand the issues that I try to address in my written work.
Okay, so what effect is the mining having on the local economy? So
I think this is also connected to the question that you just asked about what inspired me to do the work. The sense that I think in the scholarship on development, whether that's in law or in policy or in economics, the general belief is that foreign investment is a natural boon for the economy of the receiving country and for development. And I wanted to challenge some of those paradigmatic beliefs. My sense from my research, from my field work, and certainly what comes through in the project that I just finished in Colombia, is that although eventually, perhaps, foreign investment in this particular instance may have positive impacts for Colombia's GDP, the development impacts in the location that is most directly affected by the investment, right? The towns that are going to be receiving, or that have received, the foreign investors, the foreign mining companies. The development impacts for those communities has been very uncertain. They have experienced long periods of complete stagnation, unemployment. This is a location where it's a traditional mining community, a set of traditional mining communities where people owned the land and owned the mines that they operated. They were local owners and active miners, and the arrival of foreign companies had the effect of removing ownership. So the companies came and bought the enterprises at low rates under the way that the people who I interviewed in the location explained it to me was that people didn't sell their property and their mining licenses for really high rates. Rather, they sold because they were afraid that if they didn't, they would be left with nothing. And so they sold at very low rates, and the result was that people who had been owners of very important economic activity in the region were shut out effectively. And so they have either left, so been economically displaced from the region, or they have stayed in the hope of employment down the road. But in this particular context, for reasons that I'll explain in a few minutes, the entire mining environment and the location has been frozen. And so the region has experienced long-term and significant levels of unemployment. And so that has been a real economic downturn for the region. The film, I think, shows how that has happened and shows how that might happen in other locations as well. And it really is meant to challenge the idea that foreign investment is necessarily and always a development benefit.
So this is having a pretty big effect on the local economy, but what effect is it having on the local environment?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In fact, the reason that I was initially drawn to the project was because of the attention that mining, the arrival of foreign mining companies to the region was getting from environmentalists that live in a large town. The fifth largest town in Colombia is a town called Bucaramanga. It's a city, and in that city there was activist mobilization around the potential environmental impacts of large-scale mining in the highlands of the Páramo de Santurbán, where this mining was set to take place. And the potential environmental impacts were significant, not just on water, but also just the ways that a very, very important ecological environment was going to be affected by what at that point was proposed to be perhaps the largest open pit mine in Latin America. That has now become, if mining goes forward, the mining will be below ground. But this is a region that supplies water to over 2 million people. And anyone who knows anything about geology would be aware that the aquifers that run under the mountains are just as active as the rivers that run above the ground. And so the concerns of the environmentalists that drew me to this project to begin with have not been significantly abated, though in the process, partially because of the activism of those environmentalists and the attention that this project has gotten, not just in Colombia, but really around the world, for people who care about the intersections of mining activity or extractive activity and the effects it has on communities and the potential effects it has on environments. The region has gotten a lot of attention from the Colombian national government as well, and the Ministry of Mines and the Ministry for the Environment have acted together in concert to create a huge park and also denominated a large area of the Páramo. 74% of the Páramo de Santurbán has been officially called a Páramo, which is a sort of a protected highland region. And the result will be that the economic activity that can occur within those boundaries of the park or of the officially recognized Páramo will be significantly constrained, and that may have beneficial impacts for the environment, although it may have negative impacts for the local communities.
So are there any other effects that the mining from the foreign companies is having on the local population?
Well, currently, the mining from foreign companies is, again, at a standstill. When Eco which is the company, it used to be called Greystar, and now it's called Eco when it petitioned for an environmental license, it had already received its mining licenses, but it petitioned for an environmental license, which was also necessary in order to move forward. That mining license was denied, and it was denied partially as a result of mobilization on the part of environmental actors. There was huge protests in the streets in Bucaramanga, and also those same activists used the Colombian Constitution to ask for and to receive the opportunity to have open consultation sessions with the affected communities. And the result of those two official and unofficial actions resulted in the Ministry for the Environment really paying close attention to to the license petition, to the license request, and ultimately denying that petition. The result was that then the whole region went into this long, years-long period in which the Ministry of Mines and the Ministry for the Environment were really studying the potential impacts on the environmental impacts and the impacts for water and the communities. And the foreign mining companies in the region really ground their operations to a halt, which is what caused the wide-scale unemployment in the region, because the owners of mines had sold, so they couldn't operate anymore. Right, they couldn't operate that territory, and meanwhile, the foreign companies to which they had sold ground their operations to a halt, and so there was wide-scale unemployment. During that period, however, what happened was that the local people know where the gold is, and this is within the context of Colombia, where there has been long-term historical violent conflict, and there was a lot of illegal gold mining going on during that period, and I expect, though I haven't been there for almost a year, I expect still that there's still a significant amount of illegal gold mining going on, and this is in Colombia, where gold is one of the funders of the ongoing conflict in that country.
So how are the relations between the foreign mining companies and the local population in this region?
Complex, really. The relationship between the foreign mining companies and local miners is really complex. So it depends on, really, it's very context specific, and it depends on who you ask. So one of the interviewees that appears in the film, a local gold miner, really spoke very strongly over the course of a couple of days that I sat with him and talked with him about his experience with the foreign mining companies. The experience that he has had is that he feels a tremendous amount of pressure to sell his mine. When we spoke, he was holding on to one of the last remaining local mines, and he was very concerned that the government was creating regulations that made it very difficult for a small-scale miner like him to continue to operate, while by creating regulations that are easier for large-scale mines to abide by in terms of environmental standards and labor standards, which are obviously important, but they made operations for him very difficult. So between the increased level of government regulations and the pressure from mining companies to sell his mine, this local miner felt a tremendous amount of pressure to sell what he and his family had held onto for generations. And the result is that his impression of the arrival of foreign mining companies is not positive. On the other hand, there are a number of people in towns like California, in that same area, that are very hopeful that foreign mining companies will get to continue to operate there, because if they do, it may in fact lead to beneficial employment for at least a generation, and that is something that gives them some reason for optimism.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like this is having really a big impact on the region.
Yeah,
so.
Very much so.
Yeah. So are there any other projects you're currently working on?
Yeah, in fact, when I finished this one, I started looking for other places in the world that were having significant experiences with the arrival of foreign mining interests. And in the South Pacific, and Melanesia specifically, foreign mining companies have become very interested in deep sea mining and also the mining of the continental shelf region of a number of countries in that area. And the impacts that deep sea mining stands to have on these island nations is really significant. And these are countries that are highly under-resourced. One of the countries in which I've been working, where I've visited a couple of times now, is Vanuatu. It regularly appears at the very bottom of the World Bank's GDP index, or very close to the bottom. But this is a very interesting country. It's a country that also has appeared more than once at the top of alternative measures of human well-being. So, for example, the Human Happiness Index, which is controversial, but nonetheless, Vanuatu appears to be doing very well by some measures, even though their GDP is very low. And so both of those features really attract me to that location. It's a place that the World Bank would have us believe is very unhappy because they have a very low GDP, but in fact the people in that country and the sense within that country is that people are well off. And so I've become very interested in why that is, right? What is that alternative vision of human well-being? At the same time as recognizing that one of the reasons for that sense of well-being is the access that the population there has to the sea. And the sea has become a desirable quantity for foreign mining interests, and that may have really significant impacts on countries like Vanuatu.
So is there anything else you would like to tell our listeners today?
You know, I encourage people to look beyond the sort of the paradigmatic picture of development as the solution to the human condition. Development, when characterized as purely as economic growth, has significant potential downsides. So growth in a finite system, meaning growth on the earth, is not something that is ultimately sustainable unless we find ways to ensure that the growth that we experience has sort of a steady state impact with respect to environmental conditions and also the human condition.
Great. So thank you for joining us today, Christiana.
Thank you so much.
That's all for this edition of Cyber Focus. If you have any comments or suggestions, please contact us at ciber@indiana.edu.